guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to sit down and chat with you about my 4th degree tear recovery versus my C-section recovery. I am now about 10 weeks postpartum, post-op from my first C-section, but my second birthing experience. If you're brand new here, my name is Erica. I have a 2.5-year-old toddler and I guess now he's almost 10 weeks old. In my head, I'm like, in my head he's still 8 weeks old, but I think a couple weeks have gone by since he turned 8 weeks. It's crazy, time is just flying. I had my first son vaginally, and that's when I ended up with the 4th degree tear and rectal tear. And then I had my second son via C-section. And a lot of you found me through my 4th degree tear videos and have experienced similar birthing experiences, and then were in similar situations as me or are contemplating C-sections down the road because you had such traumatic first birthing experiences. So I thought that maybe this would be helpful to just kind of sit down, chat with you through some of my experiences recovering from the 4th degree tear versus the C-section and which I prefer. Before we jump in, let me just say that obviously this is coming from just my own experience, and everyone's birthing experience is so different. Obviously, I can only talk to my own experience and my own recovery. Everyone's bodies recover differently and at different times. It takes different lengths of time for people to feel like themselves again. And so just keep that in mind. Though my experience was some type of way with a vaginal birth and some type of way with a C-section, that might not be your experience. So that being said, off the top, let's jump into it. Let's jump into the 4th degree tear first. I had my first son via vaginal birth. I had a epidural. I was induced, and I pushed. I put that in quotations. I pushed. No quotations needed. I pushed for almost 3 hours. Before he was born, the midwife said that she needed to give me an episiotomy. Obviously, at that point, after being in labor for more than a day and pushing for 3 hours, I was like, you can do whatever you need to do to get that baby out. Please just get him out. So I had an episiotomy. I remember like her really reaching in, grabbing my son, and then I ended up with a 4th degree tear and a rectal tear. Because that happened, it was determined that I qualified for a C-section for my second baby. And my doctor was really open and honest with me, which I thought was really lovely. She said, you know, you qualify for a C-section, don't want to have a C-section, you can try for a vaginal delivery again. But in her opinion, it was more likely that I would tear severely again with a vaginal birth. So she recommended that I go through it with a C-section, and I had the C-section with my second son. My 4th degree tear recovery experience, all of which I vlogged, was very traumatic. I was also a first-time mom, so just dealing with all the first-time mom emotions and the worries and the stress of it all was a lot on top of the recovery. If you were here during that time and you watched those videos, then you know that the recovery for me was really, really tough. I remember barely being able to walk. I'm pretty sure I was wheeled out when it was time to leave the hospital in a wheelchair. It was so incredibly difficult for me to sit. I had so many stitches from front to back. Recovery in the hospital was pretty awful because of all the stitches. It was a lot of padding, it was a lot of peri-bottle, it was a lot of assistance from the nurses. And then when I got home, it was a lot of assistance from my mom. Luckily, we were living at my parents at the time. A lot of assistance from my husband. Again, a lot of peri-bottle. Because I was stitched shut, it was so hard to go to the bathroom. It was so hard to go to the bathroom. It was so hard to go number 2. It was so hard to go number 1 as well. Like, it was hard to pee because the acidity of my urine on the stitches felt horrible, which is where the peri-bottle came in. Also, sitting on the toilet was really difficult because I was stitched closed. Anything that like pulled me apart was just awful. I also couldn't sit upright. I couldn't sit on my sits bones. I had to sit sort of leaned back in my low back. Even sitting on a soft surface like a couch or a bed was really awful. So I was pretty much bedridden horizontally for the first few weeks. I couldn't walk for months. It wasn't until for 4.5, 5 months that I even started feeling like myself again. Luckily, because I was living at my parents', I didn't have a lot of like household duties like I do now that we're in our own place. I didn't have like dishes to wash. I had like people to help me with just like laundry and like maintaining our space and stuff. I can't even imagine how hard it would have been with the 4th degree tear, not being able to walk and move, if I also then had like a house and other kids to care for. I told my mom after I had the 4th degree tear that like I didn't want any more children, that like Hugo was going to be an only child, because I could not imagine having another baby vaginally. I bled for so long, weeks and weeks and weeks, taking Tylenol for weeks as well, stool softeners for a really long time. Overall, the entire experience was incredibly debilitating and so mentally draining, physically the most difficult thing I'd ever gone through. Fast forward to the C-section. My C-section recovery was a dream in comparison to the 4th degree tear. For a lot of women, they want to avoid having a C-section, and the recovery for a C-section is a lot worse than their vaginal deliveries. But I think if you've had a severe 3rd degree tear or 4th degree tear, a recovery from a C-section is actually like a walk in the park and kind of amazing. And again, everyone's bodies are different, but that is how it felt for me. For me, having a C-section felt like a very controlled surgery and a very controlled healing experience versus the 4th degree tear, which just felt like I had no control and felt just overall so much harder and just took so much longer to heal. Like I said, I couldn't really walk and feel like myself for the first 4 months. And so in comparison to that, getting up and even just being able to move around a little bit in those first few hours, those first few days of having my C-section was incredible to me. I was like so blown over. And if you watch those vlogs, and you'll just see like I'm hooked up with a bunch of cords to medicine, and I'm not moving very much and very far, but even just being able to stand up and move a little bit felt spectacular. Also, being able to go to the bathroom felt amazing. Obviously, going number 2 after you have a C-section still is really difficult and it's not a walk in the park. However, being able to go to the bathroom and not worrying about stitches and not worrying about like the entire bottom part of you falling out is pretty amazing. I do remember the first day of healing from my C-section, it being difficult, right? It's a major abdominal surgery. Like, don't get it twisted. There's nothing easy about a C-section. I think a lot of times the misconception is that a C-section is the easier way to go, but it's absolutely not. Recovering from a C-section is really, really hard. It's just the duration of the recovery that I found easier in comparison to the 4th degree tear. The 4th degree tear took so much longer to recover from versus the C-section, and that's what for me made the C-section so much easier of an experience to go through. It also just felt better. It felt like a better healing process, and it felt like my body was actually healing versus with the 4th degree tear. The healing was happening in such small increments that it was despairing at times, because it felt like I wasn't recovering, and it didn't feel like I could measure my recovery because it was happening in such small increments. Whereas with a C-section, it was like, okay, like a day has gone by, I feel a little better. Another day has gone by, I feel a little better. A week has gone by, wow, I can actually walk around. 2 weeks have gone by, I feel like I could clean my house. I'm not going to, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, I just felt so much better. I also didn't need to take pain medicine for as long with the C-section as I did with the 4th degree tear. Took it for, I think, maybe a week after I came home from the hospital, and then I didn't feel like I needed it anymore. I will say that, 10 weeks post-op, I'm still feeling kind of tender. There's still some like I'm having like this weird numbness above my C-section incision, which you guys have all told me is pretty normal. Just the nerve endings in that area that are healing. So there are definitely things that 10 weeks post-op I'm still experiencing. It's not as if I don't feel anything, but it only being 10 weeks post-surgery to me it just feels so much better than it did when I was 10 weeks post my vaginal delivery. I'll also be super honest with you, like mentally, I've been in such a better place than I was 2.5 years ago when I had my first son. And obviously a lot of that has to do with the healing process. I think it being such a controlled surgery and it being a very controlled recovery has helped so much as well, because I'm in this headspace of having a toddler, my toddler being on a very strict schedule, having a home, having chores, having things I need to do. It's been so nice mentally for me to be able to see and recognize the healing that's happening in my body and to be able to continue with my life and not feel quite as debilitated as I did the first time around. So guys, I hope that that was a coherent picture and a good retelling of my experience healing from the 4th degree tear and the C-section, and them in comparison to one another. Ultimately, I would pick a C-section over and over again versus a 4th degree tear and having to recover from that experience. Everyone is different and everyone's recovery is different, but please let me know down in the comments if you have had either. Don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye guys.